Alright, so let's go ahead and add all of the finishing touches to our magazine cover. You're going to pick one of your image directions to move forward with. I'm going to go with this one. And I actually had two different backgrounds. I had the flag idea and also the clean background. But I'm going to move forward with the clean background because it's actually going to help me incorporate all of my headlines and all the other components that I want to include. If your background is a little bit busier, that's okay. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging to fit in everything that you want to fit in. And you might need to do some like brushing with a black brush to create a little bit of a darker area, or use a white brush to create a little bit of a lighter area in some cases to really clean up a zone for typography. Because it's really important that typography is readable. And so just keep that in mind, that if your background's a little busier, no worries, but you might just have to work a little bit with the image to get that typography to read really clearly. If you do have a clean background, it's going to be a little bit more simple, and it's one of the reasons why you see this type of clean background in magazine covers so often. It's because it's really easy to work with, and it allows you to get a much cleaner dynamic between the image and all that type. Okay, so there's a few things I want to include in this magazine cover. One is the barcode, and along with the barcode, we're going to put the price information in. There's also the tagline for the magazine, along with the issue number or date, and then also some sort of headline. Okay, so I'm going to start with the headline because that is most important after the masthead and the image. And the first thing that I'm kind of looking at are where are some of the places where I could potentially fit the headline in. One thing I could do is move the masthead down and put the headline kind of above the masthead. But I think in this case, since I have a clean background, it'd be better to use that background area for our headline. So it could either go on this side of the portrait or on this side of the portrait, or maybe down here on the sleeve where there's sort of a dark area. That could be another potential place where we can fit a headline in a pretty clean way. I'm just going to go with one headline, but you're welcome to do 2 or 3. In general, though, I think it's good to keep it pretty simple, and one made headline usually does the trick. So I'm going to stick with 1. Okay, I think I'm going to put the headline over here. That's the place that I feel like is going to be most effective. And a lot of times it's good to have the portrait or the figure look at the headline itself rather than have its back turned to the headline, because that's a little bit more of an engaging dynamic. So what I'm going to do is start by moving him over just a bit. Okay, this is going to give me more room to work with. So don't be afraid to change your image around to, get a little bit more space. So let's just kind of move him over. And let's go ahead and work on our headline. And you're welcome to put any kind of headline you want into your magazine. Okay, I'm pulling a headline from a different source over here. Okay, so my article is called The Divide. And then there's some teaser text. Let's go ahead and just go to our type options here. And I'm going to turn down our leading to something more reasonable. Okay, let's also change our tracking. Okay, and then the teaser copy is how to ask people about their beliefs. Okay, and then I'm also going to put a page number. And for the page number, I'll just put something random, 84. So again, up to you how you want to, come up with your headline. You can either use something from a related magazine or just come up with something that is related to your image. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be totally real. It's mostly about just getting the right look. Okay, so we need to get some, hierarchy going on in here. So let's go ahead and make our headline a little larger. Okay, that looks good. Let's go to a heavier weight. There we go. Let's also track this in just a bit, because I think I like the slightly tighter tracking in this case. All right, great. And then this text feels maybe a little small. Let's just bump it up by 1 point and then go down to maybe a lightweight. Okay, that looks pretty good. We are getting what's called a widow in here, which is one word on a line. Okay, so to fix that, I'm just going to double click back into our type. Then I'm going to hit Shift Return right before there to bring that word down. Okay, so that's going to create sort of an extra little line break that's going to bring that down to the bottom. Okay, and then for the page number, let's go ahead and bring that up to a heavier weight and just leave that sort of underneath. Okay, so that looks pretty good. One thing we might want to do is just sort of kern in this letter, because when you look at it, it feels like this is a little uneven. That's because the T should actually come out just a bit so that optically it lines up a little bit more. So let's go ahead and put our cursor in there, and then we can just sort of kern this in just a bit to kind of bring that and tighten that up just a bit. Let's also go up just a little bit with our page number. Okay, I want that to really pop on us. Okay, cool. So that's looking really good. And you can see that the scale difference between the masthead and the headline is working pretty well. I'm definitely seeing the image and the masthead first, and then I'm sort of going down to here. And you can play around with different positioning of this and different alignments, and also different fonts. I'm using the same font that I used for my masthead, but you definitely don't have to. It's up to you, to figure out what is the right font or the right mix of fonts to convey what you want to convey. Okay, so you could also try going like right aligned. That could help potentially create a little bit of a alignment with the masthead, but I think left aligned for me is working a little bit better. And then of course there's always center aligned. Okay, that might work in certain situations, but I think that the structure of just a regular left alignment is working best here. Okay, and I'm just going to line this up with this element because I think that's just going to look a little bit more organized. Let's just scoot him over a bit. Great. Okay, so we also want to put in our tagline, and I think the tagline could fit in really nicely above the masthead in this case, or maybe it wants to come kind of down here in the sleeve. That's another interesting place for it. Let's put it kind of above. I feel like that's going to work pretty well. Okay, so I'm going to move the masthead down a little bit. Let's sort of rearrange the portrait, and then let's add another piece of type. Okay, there we go. And our tagline is news that matters. Okay, I'm going to go with all caps in this case. And let's shrink this down. Okay, and I think sort of a medium weight, maybe a bold weight. And let's increase the tracking a bit as well. Okay, and then I'm going to center align this. And this will help us just kind of center it in this area. There we go. So that looks pretty good. It's a little bit lost up there, so let's also try it kind of down below. So we can go ahead and make the type white. Okay, so let's do that. And yeah, that's working pretty well down there. Okay, we probably need to lock up some other elements with it because it feels a little bit lost. Okay, so maybe this is a good place to also put our issue number or date. Okay, so let's move our masthead a little bit back up. Okay, kind of rearrange this. And once again, I want to create some alignment here, so you can always drag in a guideline. Okay, and that'll help you kind of line things up. Generally speaking, lining things up vertically is a good way to work. Okay, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and copy this element. And actually, it's still center aligned. Okay, so let's go ahead and left align it, because it's not really right to have it be center aligned. Okay, and then we can just sort of bring it back. Okay, and I'm just using the arrow keys to move it over. You can just drag it. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to copy this element by holding down Option and just dragging down a copy. And then let's use a similar typeface for the issue number. Okay, so let's call it issue 21. And then I'll put a few spaces and put the date, February 2019. Okay, and you can put whatever you want there. It's up to you. There we go. So that looks pretty good, except that, there's no sense of hierarchy in here. So potentially what we can do is go heavier with the tagline. And then let's go down to our issue number and go to a much lighter weight, maybe regular. Okay, let's bring our tracking in just a bit. There we go. So if I turn off that guideline, you can see now there is a nice clear hierarchy between all those pieces of information. So that's working pretty well. Okay, and that's really readable over that dark sleeve. So that's working well for me. Let's also go ahead and put in our barcode. Okay, so for the barcode, you can just use an image. My barcode I just got from the internet. It's just a regular image. And you just want to make sure that it's a large enough image. Mine is really big, and that's going to be, good to just ensure that it doesn't get pixelated. So let's go ahead and drag that into our composition. Okay, we can resize it down, and generally speaking, you want your barcode to be pretty small. You don't want it to take over. You want it to be a pretty small element, but you don't want it to be so small that it's not usable. So just keep it at a reasonable size. Okay, so, a really natural place to put it would be at the bottom. And since it has a white background, it could definitely fit here. But one thing to consider is, turning it vertical. Okay, so it still works in a vertical orientation. Maybe we want to kind of tuck it into that corner. Okay, so that looks pretty good. We could potentially line it up with our other elements to kind of keep it on the grid. But I think in this case, it actually looks better kind of tucked into the side. So let's just kind of keep it really small in the corner. Okay, and then one thing that I think I can do in this case is actually set the barcode to multiply. Okay, so when we do that, it's going to get rid of that white background, and that feels a little bit more integrated into the design. Just consider the fact that these barcodes do need a certain minimum amount of contrast between the background and the barcode itself. So if you don't have a very light, clean background, this isn't going to work. And no big deal. You can always use a white background for the barcode. But if you do have a really light, clean background, this is something you can consider because it just looks a little bit more clean. I think this barcode could actually be a little smaller. So let's just shrink it down even further. There we go. And then the last thing I want to do is incorporate a price. So I'm actually going to start by just copying in this piece of typography. Oops, and I have to hold down Option to make a copy. Okay, and then let's just really quickly type in our price. Sometimes there's a price for US and a price for Canadian, but I'm going to keep it simple and just type in a really quick price here. Okay, and we'll scale that down just a bit and maybe go down to black for that piece of type. Okay, and that can be really small. Even like 6 points is totally reasonable. Okay, so let's put that in. All right, so that's looking pretty good for my cover. I recommend that you guys explore a bunch of different typefaces and a bunch of different options for getting everything to fit. Remember that the readability of type is really important. So you can see that this piece of type and this piece of type are super easy to read. They're not being covered up or hidden. You want those elements to be really prominent, but then also think about hierarchy. We've got a pretty good sense of hierarchy going on here with, again, the image and the masthead coming first, followed by the headline, and then this sort of tagline and the issue number, and then the price coming last. The price can be really small. We could easily incorporate some more headlines into this too. So if you just sort of think about this as a layout, maybe you want to have multiple headlines. Okay, and that could fit in this area. But that's up to you and how clean or complex you want to make your cover. If you do have multiple headlines, consider even having some hierarchy between the two different headlines. So maybe you have one main headline that is a little bigger, and then the other headlines get a little bit smaller potentially.